Dr. Anthony Fauci still kind of coming out of the hot water, might still be in it, depends on what side of the aisle you're on. But Dr. Fauci, we know because we spent a lot of time on yesterday's show talking about his emails. Something like 10,000 emails now have come out, 3,200 pages, back and forth between all sorts of different people. Yesterday, we saw that Dr. Fauci was even talking with Mark Zuckerberg about supporting vaccine distribution and making sure that Facebook is communicating appropriately to their billion users. And so we were, sort of peering through what Dr. Fauci was doing here and there. And I was trying to be diplomatic about this and sort of being empathetic. And I've tried to hold that tone on this channel throughout the pandemic, recognizing that many people in our government, they really don't know sort of what they're facing. This was an unprecedented crisis. We've never seen anything quite like this. And so I wanted to be sure that we gave our, leaders, the people who are in charge of us, some leeway, a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of humanity in dealing with a crisis like this, because it was something that nobody had ever seen before. And I would sort of want that if I were in their position. I would say, listen, guys, I'm doing my best here. I could use a little bit of grace, and I would appreciate that coming my way. And so I've been trying to extend that out to these people, even though for a long time, I've had a lot of criticisms and condemnations of Fauci and our government's response from top to bottom. Whether Trump was in office, Biden's in office, doesn't matter to me. A lot of this felt like there was a lot of information missing that is now sort of being discussed about where the coronavirus came from, and the list goes on and on. So I've done a lot of sort of deep dives on that on my separate channel. I have a separate video that does a deep dive on the Nicholas Wade article, which goes over the 4 factors that help us differentiate and determine where the coronavirus came from. Was it a lab escape, or did this come from a bat in a cave in Wuhan or southern China? So there's a lot of questions here. Now, we went through the emails, and Dr. Fauci is sort of out there now. He knows these emails came out. BuzzFeed and Washington Post, they did Freedom of Information Act requests, and they got their hands on all of these emails. And we combed through them a little bit yesterday. But now Dr. Fauci is out there responding to these because people have questions, because there were some issues that were in the emails. We were saying, well, he's been really talking a lot about these masks and how important they are. But back in February, his tone was a little bit different. What happened there? We got questions about that. We've also got questions about some of the emails between Dr. Fauci and Dr. Daszak. Of course, he is associated with EcoHealth Alliance, which got a contract from the NIAID through the NIH, which is Dr. Fauci is the director of that. So we went through the chain and connected the dots about how this all may have resulted in funding from the U.S. government that stemmed its way through EcoHealth Alliance, through Dr. Daszak, through the Wuhan Lab of Virology, through Dr. Shi, who is affectionately known as Bat Lady because of her work with bats. So we've got this really sort of deep web that we can weave here. And Dr. Fauci, we got questions about this. What was your involvement here? You got some emails here that make it seem like you're getting pretty cozy with some people that it looks like have a very big conflict of interest. If the virus originated from a lab and the U.S. government was funding the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that's a big deal. We need to know about that. If China is covering up any of the investigations, or they're not communicating with the authorities appropriately, which we're going to see here is now sort of making its way into evidence, that's a problem, and we want to get to the bottom of it. So we've got 4 different clips that we're going to go through, and what I've done here is I've just taken out kind of Fauci's response. These news anchors, they like to sort of make their political statements, cut all of that out. I'm just going to give you the question and Fauci's response just for the sake of time. Of course, if you want to see the full clips, I've got links to, I think, most everything in our slides. You can download those. So let's start off by getting some background here from CNN Health. It says, Dr. Anthony Fauci says publicly that the released emails are being misconstrued, right? And so that's going to be kind of the big tone here, the big theme. We've got misconstrued data. You're taking this all out of context, which I can actually sympathize with to some degree, right? There was a lot of information flying around. Nobody knew what they were doing. And we're going to talk about that more here shortly. This was written today, June 3rd, by Jacqueline Howard. It says, in an interview with CNN on Thursday, Dr. Fauci said in an email he received last year from an executive at the U.S.-based EcoHealth Alliance, which is run by Dr. Daszak. He says it has been misconstrued, and offered a hint of regret about a February 2020 email downplaying the need to wear a mask. Earlier this week, news outlets, including CNN, BuzzFeed, and WAPO, obtained thousands of emails, Fauci said, and received since the director of the National Institute and Allergy and Infectious Diseases became a household name early last year, the NIAID, which is the organization that I keep talking about. In one email sent to Fauci last April, an executive at EcoHealth Alliance, the global nonprofit that helped fund and research at China's Wuhan Institute of Virology, thanked Fauci for publicly stating that the scientific evidence supports a natural origin for the coronavirus and not a lab release. And so we talked about this yesterday. Talked about it in my deep dive Wuhan article, because the Nicholas Wade article covers all in depth about Dr. Daszak. And I actually show different clips from a podcast that he did where he's talking about all of this gain of function research that's all being done, conducted out of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Then we start to see that Dr. Daszak goes radio silent as soon as more evidence about the pandemic starts to unfold circa 2019, December 2019. Then he just kind of goes MIA. So we have Dr. Fauci now. We've got all these questions for him. Here he is with, what's this woman's name? Nicole Wallace. So here's Nicole Wallace on MSNBC, and she is going through this question. And of course, a lot of this is sort of, there's a lot of overlap here, because Fauci worked for Trump during the Trump administration in the first part of this pandemic, and now he's working for Biden during the second half of the pandemic, or let's say the cleanup portion of the ordeal. And he's on here with Nicole Wallace, and she's saying, hey, Dr. Fauci, it sounds like your job's pretty hard, probably pretty hard because of all of those Trump supporters, right? And, the message that you're trying to get out there feels like there are a lot of people out there who are still hardened up against your message. What do you say about that? And how do you handle this? So then Dr. Fauci goes in, and you're going to notice that he starts to talk about science being dynamic and that it changes. And if you were here for yesterday's live stream, we spent a lot of time talking about this, and I had to dig way back down into my science classes from, 5th grade or whenever the heck you do that stuff. And I had to dig out the scientific method. And I was thinking, well, that's, science kind of, it has a written format that we follow. And what Fauci was doing for this last 12 months didn't feel like it followed that at all. I kept hearing people scream at us, science, follow the science, you all are Neanderthals, and anybody who doesn't put the mask on or immediately follow all of our lockdown orders and be happy about it, by the way, then you're a Neanderthal, and you are just too dumb and you don't understand that this is science. And I'm scratching my head saying, well, I'm hearing a lot of conclusions from the government, not really hearing a lot of hypotheses or discussions taking place, or hearing even really an explanation about why they're coming up with the conclusions they're coming up with. We heard a lot of conclusions, and we heard a lot of changing conclusions. You remember some of this? We went from absolutely do not wear masks to then suddenly got to wear masks. Then, we changed from, well, this can live on a surface for 30 days. Then 14 days. Now it's like, does it even do that at all? We had a lot of concerns about whether you can catch it again. Do you remember that whole saga, right? If you get it, there are people getting it again. Oh my gosh, you can get it again. We're going to have to, we're never going to escape the coronavirus. And so the government is having these back and forths day after day, and they're just coming out with new conclusions and new guidelines. And we're waiting for our governors and our legislators to tell us when the new lockdown orders are and what other liberties they're going to be taking away from us, like not going out to eat, not going out to your church, not being able to go see your kids. And, we saw pictures of grandparents hugging their grandkids through cellophane and stuff. I'm going, what kind of insane world is this? And everybody out there is screaming at us, it's science. And anybody who objects to it is a Neanderthal who just is a troglodyte who knows nothing about anything. And if they object or talk about it, what happens? They got to get thrown off the internet. They are labeled conspiracy theorists. And so as we listen to Dr. Fauci, remember that. Remember that he's telling us about science being dynamic and about this ongoing conversation that we're supposed to be having and about keeping an open mind in all of this, when that was not the same courtesy that we were afforded for the last 12 months. It was the opposite of that. It was, you are against science, and if you don't do what we say, you're actually killing grandma. So let's listen to this, and remember that Nicole Wallace, her question was about kind of the hardened Trump supporters. How do you converse with them? Here's Dr. Fauci.
Yeah, there's no doubt that there are people out there who, for one reason or other, resent me for what I did in the last administration, which was not anything that was anti-Trump at all. It was just trying to get the right information, to try and get the right data. And what they didn't seem to understand, I guess that's understandable that they didn't understand it, is that science is a dynamic process. So something that in January, you make a recommendation or a comment about it. But as you get more and more information, the information leads you to change, because that's what science is. It's a self-correcting process. So when you hear someone say something at one point, and then 2 or 3 months later, if you stick with what you said at the original time when you had 1/5 the amount of data that you have now, I think that would be inappropriate. It's appropriate, although sometimes it's difficult for people to understand how, as you learn more and more, you've got to continue to evolve with the data. And that's what I was trying to do, is to always tell the truth on the basis of what the data is. And it was never deliberately something against the president. In fact, you spoke about my emails. You look at my emails, I never in the email said anything derogatory about President Trump.
Yeah, but all right, so you didn't have to say anything because we know it. And as soon as Trump left office, you were out there hitting the waves, going on all the different media shows like, oh, gosh, what a change in scenery this has been. So as we know, right, we saw Nicole Wallace. She gets really excited when he starts to sort of blame the prior administration. That's, we can't really blame them. They didn't know what they were talking about. And it's acceptable that for people not to understand this, because it's really complicated, because science is dynamic. And unfortunately, sometimes people just don't get that. I'm a nice guy. I'm trying to deliver the truth. I'm doing the best I can. And science is dynamic. And you heard him like 3 or 4 times in there condescend to everybody and just say, hey, unfortunately, people just don't get it. And he's not talking about the enlightened left. He's not talking about Nicole Wallace and the people who have been following his orders lockstep for the last 12 months. He's talking about all of the other people that have questions and maybe take some issue with what the government tells us is happening when it doesn't make logical sense, when it actually contradicts their own orders that they're telling us. We're just asking some questions here. And, Fauci is moving the goalposts. And to be honest, in that last clip, I agree with everything he said there. I mean, I totally agree with that. Science is dynamic. Science does change. And I don't expect somebody to come out here and do an experiment and say, well, we settled this issue. Okay. Back in the 1930s, they do an experiment. Thomas Edison invents the light bulb and he goes, that's it. Light bulb's done. We're done here. Thanks for playing. Right. We're going to do more experimentation, new hypotheses, new theories, new testing, and we're going to try new material. We're going to improve. Science improves. Technology improves. That's something that happens. And I agree with that. But that's not what we went through. That wasn't what the last 12 months were about. It was follow your leaders. Take our commands, ingest them, make them your own, and obey them. Don't contradict us. Don't fight with any of us. If you do, there's going to be some pretty serious consequences for you. And we saw this. I don't need to go through the laundry list here, but we saw it all over the place. And Dr. Fauci was the figurehead. He was the person at the very top. Everybody was following his orders. He set the tone for the entire country. Mark Zuckerberg was sending him emails saying, hey, what do you want me to do about this for 250 billion people or 250 million people in the United States and 1 billion worldwide? And we saw what happened. We got the little COVID stickers on everything. There's probably one right here on YouTube and Facebook right now. COVID, because everybody was following Fauci's lead. So let's take a look now. He said that science was dynamic. And if you recall on yesterday's show, spent some time talking about this. As I mentioned at the start of the program, I was really digging back into my science days. I think I took AP chemistry, by the way, which is advanced placement. So clearly I'm an expert at this stuff. But the point is, I remember that there was, these charts and these flow charts and this sort of pinwheel and this circle that we followed. And then I got off the show and somebody on Twitter had a comment for me. And they said, hey, Rob, that scientific concept that you're talking about, the scientific method, could use a little refresher. How about I give you one? So he did. And this is over here from Left Coast is the Best Coast. And this actually has a happy ending. So let me show you what's going on here. He says, Robert, hope this helps. You know that black hole in the middle of the Milky Way? Apparently it might be sort of a strange dark matter instead. He says, see? Question mark. Scientific understanding of a subject can change drastically. Then he gives us a couple of these charts, which we're going to look at in the next slide. He followed that tweet up. He says, look, this does not mean the observations we had already made, the background research, were wrong. He says stars do weird things when they orbit the core, but the understanding of the cause changes drastically over time. So he's talking about science, and he actually gave us these two charts, which I love, and I really appreciate that he sent them over. We have two of them here that are sort of working us through the scientific method, right? At the start, at the top here, this is the one I think I remember from 5th grade. It says you start with an observation or a question, like, I don't know, is the coronavirus something that emerged naturally or from a cave? or from a lab? Did it escape from a lab? Well, we research the topic area, meaning you do some actual research here. You actually dig into it, and you sort of try to uncover and answer the question. Then you come up with a hypothesis. You say, well, we got a couple options here. It could have originated from a cave in Wuhan, or it could have actually escaped from a level 5 virology lab where they're doing gain of function research involving bats. Could be that also. So we have a hypothesis, then we test the hypothesis, and we do a lot of rigorous testing, and we test it multiple different ways, and we see what answer we get. Then we get some data that we analyze, then we report the conclusions. And typically the conclusions are based on all of this other stuff that you've done, right? The conclusions come out and you say, well, based on the data, based on the tests, based on our original hypothesis, we tried to answer this question through other research, couldn't do it. And so we've got a conclusion here. But listen, this conclusion, it could be subject to change. This is what we found thus far. And so we're sort of telling you about the work that we've done and fleshing out a couple different options here. This is our conclusion. It's like 70%. Right, or 80%, but there are some alternatives here. If it were 100%, then that's the end of the inquiry, isn't it? If it's less than that, well, then you got to, go back around through the flywheel again. If it's not 100%, we can't rule anything out. Well, we're still going to be asking questions about it, and we're going to continue to go through this flywheel again and again and again and again and again and again. And guess what? We're doing that right now. As we know, we're starting in this process again. We're going through this right now. But Fauci, back during his time, didn't allow us to do any of this. Okay, none of this happened. We actually kind of skipped most of the research in the topic area. He says he did it. We saw a bunch of emails going back and forth. We saw several different emails saying that no, actually, we saw one email, by the way, from Dr. Christian Anderson, who said that what they saw in their analysis didn't match the evolutionary expectations that you would see from a natural virus, essentially. That's paraphrasing the email, but I covered it in the show yesterday. So in fact, when they're researching this area of topic about whether this was a man-created virus or a naturally occurring virus, there was plenty of research that showed the alternative, that in fact, this actually could have been engineered, as we now know through Nicholas Wade. Did that information not exist 6 months ago? Pretty sure that it did. So let's take a look now. We have a hypothesis then. So, we kind of really didn't get that. Did you ever hear Fauci come out and say, well, these are two credible theories, and we're going to be doing a lot of testing. We're going to be doing a lot of investigation into this. No, they didn't do any of that. Really, the test came down to kind of accepting the Chinese and their word for it, as we're going to get to later on. Because in our next clip, Fauci goes on, and somebody asked him specifically about this. Are we just going to be taking the Chinese word for it? And you're going to hear him. He acknowledges it. He says, yeah, that's kind of what we did, because they just gave us information. We were not even able to go in there and investigate what was going on in Wuhan. So did they do any testing? Not really. Did they analyze the data? I mean, they say they did. Dr. Christian Anderson sent an email. He says that he did his analysis. Then they report the conclusions. Okay, so we kind of just skipped most of this. It went from, hey, we got a question about this. Where the hell does this virus come from? To a little bit of little touches here, maybe a couple of this stuff. Then we just get right to the conclusions. A lot of conclusions coming out of Fauci and the government. And we really didn't go through a scientific method. We got a lot of conclusions, and you can see the same type of process here. You ask a question, you actually do some research, you come up with a hypothesis, you test it with an experiment, meaning you actually investigate it. Then you determine, is this working or not? If not, you got to revise the test. Okay, you got this little loop here. That test's not giving us the results or the answers we want. Let's keep trying, let's keep trying, let's keep trying. Then you get enough data, you can draw some conclusions. If it aligns with your hypothesis, you can communicate the results. If it partially aligns with your hypothesis, you can communicate results, and then you can ask new questions again, right? And we just kind of missed most of this. We didn't do any of this. And the results partially align with Fauci's hypothesis about that this was something that came from nature, even though a lot of evidence to show the opposite of that. And even though there are some pretty significant conflicts of interest here between Fauci and Dr. Daszak and EcoHealth Alliance that was being funded by the NIH. So a lot of questions here. Doesn't sound like a really rigorous scientific method, does it? Not to me. And so when I communicated that back to our Twitter friend over here, I said, hey, I do not have any problem communicating theories or conclusions and discussing them in the scientific context. I have problems when people state their scientific conclusions as scientific fact beyond reproach and browbeat anyone who disagrees, which is what Fauci did. He said, yeah. And in that part, we wholeheartedly agree. When testing the hypothesis, we treat it as fact, test to tear up the facts, and see what lays out in the end. I cannot conceive how good science would ever say a hypothesis is fact before testing. So he's exactly right. We also, I think, agree, actually. He posted this here also. He said he was responding yesterday to the 54-minute mark from today. Said, with that in mind, Fauci is a damn liar. Read the science. Being dynamic, that's a whole topic. Enjoy the Google search and your favorite initial result. So here we've got the real crux of the argument. Is science static or dynamic? It says here, those who view science as static assert that science consists of a group of facts that are best memorized. Those who view science as dynamic believe that scientific ideas develop and change, and that the best way to learn these ideas is to understand what they mean and how they are related. Right? So sounds like Fauci sort of evolved. Like he went from a static science person that had a bunch of conclusions that were ready and available for the American public's consumption, all about the masks and the vaccines and how long it's on, and everything that we needed to do. Fauci said, we've got conclusions, take them to the bank. They're not dynamic. They're static. Now Fauci comes out, oh, well, science is pretty dynamic, isn't it? A lot of things change here and there. And so I'm just doing my best. So Fauci then late last night goes on another interview. He's over on the Donlon Report, which is this fella here. And there are questions, of course, about what's going on. Now, this guy, Donlon, or the Donlon Report, is being hosted here by Leland Vittert, who is a former Fox News agent or anchor. And so what we've got, I just wanted to sort of compare and contrast these clips. We just heard from Nicole Wallace over at MSNBC. I didn't play the clip there, but she's like, she's feigning over Dr. Fauci. She's like, hey, most people, when their emails are released, there are a lot of bad things in there, but you pass the public inspection of your emails, and so you're basically good in my book. So very light interview, a lot of levity there. Then we get over to this interview. Okay, this is a Fox News guy.
Chinese word,
a little bit more contentious. Let's listen in here.
Chinese word for it. Do we have any idea on what's going on inside the Wuhan lab, or what went on inside the Wuhan lab?
Well, again, let's put things in context. The scientists in the Wuhan lab, for years and years, among other credible, trusted scientists in China. We're not talking about the Communist Chinese Party. We're not talking about the Chinese military. We're talking about scientists that we've had relationships for years.
I guess what I'm hearing from you is we should just trust the Chinese when they say, oh, no, the military has nothing to do with this. We should believe them.
No, what I'm saying is that we have very many years of experience of productive interaction with Chinese scientists.
Doctor, I'm not disputing that you had great work with them, but what I'm trying to get at is that all of the comments that were made about what happened inside that lab are based essentially on taking the Chinese word for it. No matter how good your experiences were over years or decades, it seems pretty clear that the Chinese lied about a number of things related to the coronavirus. We can all agree about that. And I'm wondering now, how can the American people be assured as we look at this that, for example, the money that went to the Wuhan lab didn't end up being used by the Chinese military? It seems as though you can't say that for certain.
Well, can we again, with due respect, put things into perspective? The Wuhan lab is a very large lab to the tune of hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion.
Right.
So now you making extrapolation that we sent in.
No, sir. I'm not making any extrapolation. No, sir. I'm not making any extrapolation. I'm simply saying the fact of the matter is that so much of what we were told as Americans about what we knew from the Chinese was based simply on taking their word.
Right.
That's fair. Okay. And based on that, we really have no idea who the scientists were in the labs.
Okay, so MRC Newsbusters pulled that clip, and I kind of wish they would have left a little bit more of Fauci in there, but you heard that last clip. Like, we just kind of took their words for it, right? And he goes, yeah, right, yep, yeah, we did, right? So that is not the scientific method. That's not rigorous testing. That's not coming up with a conclusion that you can say is based in something that matters. It's just sort of, well, they said so. And he goes through and he's going to make this point again as we continue on here that, our Chinese counterparts are people that we can trust. That this is $1 billion lab and these are good scientists and we trust their work. And you start thinking, has this guy, has he ever been to China? I've been to China. I've got a video of the wet market that we went through on Second Channel. But the whole point here is that they are an authoritarian, totalitarian government. They control everything. That's the whole point of China, right? That they are sort of a giant monolith. If they've got a level 5 virology lab there, that's a billion-dollar enterprise. Are they just hands off on this? Like the Chinese military has got no involvement in this at all, and that we should just take their word for it? So it's like, come on, Dr. Fauci, like nobody believes that you're this naive. So why are you feigning this for all of us to see this? Like it's incredibly frustrating. All right, so we've got another clip from him. Now, this is over once again on MSNBC. So this was this morning after he, kind of had that contentious interview. Now he's back on MSNBC. This is Morning Joe. And this anchor here, he says, well, why is it so hard to find the source? Why is this so difficult? Is it that we need better access to the information? What's going on here? He says, is China opaque? Is it the World Health Organization, or what's going on? And here you're going to hear Dr. Fauci. Now you're going to hear him say a lot of things like keep an open mind. We're just looking for the truth, which is great. Okay. Thank you for that. Now, a year later, way too little, way too late. And there have been many of us who've been wanting to ask these questions for a long time, and we couldn't. I mean, if you go back on our channel, we have almost never talked about COVID because YouTube came down and put the kibosh on it. Now, their policies are modifying a little bit, and we can talk about some of this stuff again. I'm still walking on eggshells over here, given what happened to Catherine's channel, but it's just, I appreciate his position now. Openness, open mind, and truth. That's all we've ever been asking for. All right, here he is.
There are several reasons, Willie, why it's difficult. I think one of the things is that we need better access to all the information. Yeah. I mean, it's obviously in China's interest to find out exactly what it is. Oh. And the is of the natural theory would be to find that link. So you have to keep looking for it. I mean, obviously you want openness and cooperation. One of the ways you can get it is don't be accusatory. Try to get both a forensic, a scientific, and an investigational approach. I think the accusatory part about it is only going to get them to pull back even more. We've got to do it in a combination of diplomacy, scientific, forensic investigation, and do it in a way that the people of good faith, not who want to do blame, but people in good faith are really trying to find out what the origin is. And we're seeing a lot of, I don't even want to describe it, a lot of pointing of fingers and things like that. Yeah. Keep an open mind and go after the truth.
You say it's in China's interest, though. Would you agree, though, Dr. Fauci, it is in their interest to hide it if there was a lab leak, or worse, if they were designing something in their lab so that the world, that America didn't know that it came out of their own lab? Wouldn't they want to conceal that?
Willie, I don't want to be speculating on that, because every time I say something like that, it as well as I, it will get completely taken out of context and go into the Twitter world like crazy. So, I mean, I'm going to leave that to other people and not surmise and guess whose interest it is. It's not helpful, because everything you say then gets completely taken out of context.
Well, and it's really, it would be like me talking about what it's.
Yeah, like what, Joe? All right, so, he kind of punts on that last question, which, of course, he's going to do. Nobody wants to criticize China because they're all sort of, in their pocket to some degree, one way or the other. So, he said that China has an interest in finding out what happened here, and that we need better access to information. Well, didn't we have about 18 months, where are we at now? Coming up on that, to do the work on that, right? December 2019 was when we first started to get wind of the coronavirus. So we've had a lot of time to do an investigation. The last we heard, that the World Health Organization was dragged around by their hair over there by the Chinese, saying, oh, no, you're going to see what we show you. Take a look over here, nothing here. And that's why people are asking for a second investigation, or a deeper investigation. Even Joe Biden has asked for one now, on the back of his canceling of Trump's investigation on the Trump's way out. So it seems pretty obvious to me that if the Chinese were complicit in the releasing of a pandemic that wrecked the world for a full year, that they might have a pretty strong interest in making sure that we don't ever find out about that. Okay. And making sure that it is the farthest thing away ever from a lab leak hypothesis, that in fact it is the opposite. It's allegedly something that came from a bat. seems very naive to me. Now, we see sort of these talking points coming out, which is what's been interesting about watching his evolution over these last 24 hours. And we're starting to see that his talking points are getting better. Here it's talking about, an open mind and going after the truth. Last time, the previous clip, we heard about science is dynamic. We heard some sort of, conversation about the prior administration and people being hardened against accepting the science and accepting reality, but he sort of switched from a static version of science into a dynamic version of science. Now he's talking about keeping an open mind and going after the truth. Dang it, we should go after the truth. Well, then he gets asked, what about China? Don't they have a part in this? Maybe they should be asked what the truth is. Well, I'm not going to go there. Why not? Oh, because Twitter's going to get a hold of it and they're going to take it out of context. All right. Okay. All right. So we got one more. We got a couple clips over here from CNN now. Dr. Fauci goes on this guy's show. And this gentleman here, this was this morning, 8:10. You can see here, CNN. And we got a couple questions from him. First and foremost, he goes through and he says, hey, you know about that email with Dr. Daszak? Dr. Daszak, of course, of EcoHealth Alliance, that was granted a contract from the NIAID to go and conduct some of this gain-of-function research experiments in Wuhan. He says, you got that email from him that we all saw. And in that email, Dr. Daszak is thanking you for going out there and saying that you don't believe that this came from a lab, that you believe that this was the natural emergence theory. Dr. Daszak sends him an email and says, hey, thanks for saying that. Appreciate it. So all of us are scratching our heads saying, that's very curious. Feels like kind of a conflict of interest because you remember Dr. Daszak was one of the authors of an article that was published in The Lancet, which is a major scientific periodical, along with a number of other authors. And in that, the abstract that we read yesterday, they said that anybody who thinks it came from a lab is a conspiracy theorist. It's actually in the article. That article was sent out into the media and everybody ran with it. Dr. Daszak has got a close relationship with Fauci, given the connection between EcoHealth and the NIAID. So the list goes on, but now they're saying, hey, Dr. Fauci, we saw the email. Okay, we know you have this relationship. Don't you think that there's a conflict there? Don't you think that there was anything too cozy about this relationship that you have? What do you have to say about that? Here's Dr. Fauci.
Oh, that's nonsense. I don't even see how they get that from that email. That email was sent to me from them. I have always said, and will say today to you, John, that I still believe the most likely origin is from an animal species to a human, but I keep an absolutely open mind that if there may be other origins of that, there may be another reason. It could have been a lab leak. I believe if you look historically, what happens in the animal-human interface, that in fact, the more likelihood is that you're dealing with a jump of species. But I keep an open mind all the time. And that's the reason why I have been public that we should continue to look for the origin. That email, in no way, you can misconstrue it however you want. That email was from a person to me saying, thank you for whatever it is he thought I said. And I said that I think the most likely origin is a jumping of species. I still do think it is, at the same time as I'm keeping an open mind that it might be a lab leak.
So two things here, two things that are very clever. He's doing a good job here of smacking away the criticism. He says, oh, that email, they sent that to me. I just received it. I had no say about any of that. I can't control what people send to me all the time. All right, it's a good point, right? You can't control that. Now, he did respond and say something like, thanks for your kind note, appreciate that. So we all know what was happening there. He knows his emails are public. He knows he's not going to say, yeah, no problem at all. I've got you covered. Don't worry about the Wuhan Lab of Virology or that contract that we signed for EcoHealth Alliance. It's all covered. I'm running point on this MFer, and I got it covered. Media says whatever I say, and they just cram it down everybody else's throats. He's not going to type that in an email or anything close to that. So he says, thanks for your nice note. And we all know what happened here because Dr. Fauci knows that his emails are all public record and he's not going to respond with something that makes him look bad. So he's not an idiot. The other thing that I noticed here is he says that we should continue to look about the source of the coronavirus. Continue. Like, oh yeah, we've been doing this all along. Well, your tone has changed pretty dramatically because a lot of people were lobbying the conspiracy theorist claim around. Now he's coming out saying, well, I'm actually reporting a conclusion now in a way that I think comports with the scientific method. If he had been talking this way for the last 12 months and saying, Well, actually, we really don't know on the origin. In my opinion, it's this, but it could be this. And here's some pretty good evidence about that. Well, maybe the media would have had a different tone. Maybe we all would have responded to this pandemic a little bit differently because we had real information. We had scientific hypothesis and a conclusion that was dynamic. But we didn't get that. We got very static conclusions from Fauci and the rest of the people who were relying on Fauci to give us their conclusions. He was the source of all of it. So we have one more clip from the CNN guy. Here you can see that there is an email that has a ton of redactions on it. And so he asks him about this email. We didn't talk about this one yesterday. This was sent April 16th. And of course, the whole email's redacted. You can't see anything there. And I saw another clip. There was something like Fauci said that there were 10,000 emails that they got in that 6-month period. The last count that I had was 3,200 pages. So there's, obviously a bunch of emails in those pages, but that's a lot of emails. And so he's going to use I can't remember all the emails defense. So watch this here.
Remember? Do you remember what was in the email?
John, they only took about 10,000 emails from me. Of course, I remember. I remember all 10,000 of them. Give me a break.
So, but to be clear, you're saying you don't remember, or you can't tell us what was in the body of that exchange.
I don't remember what's in that redacted, but the idea, I think, is quite far-fetched that the Chinese deliberately engineered something so that they could kill themselves as well as other people. I think that's a bit far out, John.
And then
a bit far out. You want to go down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole here for a quick second? How about this? We know that this virus, right, it sort of impacts different demographics and ethnicities at different proportionalities. And what if the Chinese had already created a vaccine, or they've already sort of immunized their population for this? Or since it's an engineered vaccine, it just doesn't impact their demographics or their ethnicities as much as it does other ethnicities. And I don't know what the official data is on that. It's sort of just speculation at this point in time. But if he says it sounds far-fetched, well, not really. If you're talking about engineering a virus, wouldn't you engineer it to not impact your country and engineer it to impact other people's countries? And in particular, China had a pretty big vested interest in making sure that America didn't have a rolling economy, didn't have Trump out there with these mega rallies with 50,000 people, packed into a stadium, and the economy's booming. Trump is this very aggressive anti-China person. And well, we got to stop this train, the MAGA train, with no brakes on it. How do we apply some brakes? Well, they release a virus, a pandemic to the world. So I'm not saying they did that, but Dr. Fauci going, well, it's so insane. If you're engineering a virus, maybe you make it so it doesn't impact your people, right? You would do it that way. And I don't know if there's any sign, maybe that'll be a novel or a book or something someday. Actually, there was a book about that. It was the Dan Brown book. I think it was one of those books. Dan Brown is the guy who wrote The Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons. He wrote another one of those books. I forget what it was. But there's this virus that is engineered and it's released into the world, and it doesn't actually kill anybody. Everybody's freaked out because they think that this virus is going to kill people, but it doesn't. It's sort of selectively engineered to only go and I think sterilize 1/3 of the population. So they just, it randomly picks certain people and it's coded to do something that affects a certain number of genomes, and then it goes and it infects a third of the population. A third of the population can't have kids anymore, and it sort of unrings this population bomb disaster that AI predicted. Right? Not a great book, but interesting, and maybe something like that happened here. So love those conspiracy theories. Now let's take a quick look and see what the White House has to say about this. So according to Jack Posobiec and Breitbart, there's a report that the White House is actively looking to dump Anthony Fauci amid revealed emails and flip-flopping. So I doubt this just right out of the gate. I just doubt it. I think Fauci has sort of been elevated into sort of demigod status, and for them to toss him would not look good. The White House, according to Breitbart, is actively looking to dump Dr. Anthony Fauci amid recent flip-flopping and released emails that show further contradictions on the pandemic response. So Jack Posobiec shared this on Instagram. He said the Biden administration is discussing an exit strategy for Dr. Fauci following the release of his emails yesterday, per a White House official. Now, if you don't follow Jack Posobiec, I think he just moved. He was over, I forget where he's at now, but he's pretty plugged in the DC establishment. I think he actually works out of DC. And so he's a good follow if you're interested in some of that stuff. But why would they dump Fauci? I mean, really, the guy's been, there are many people that I know that just whatever he says, that's it. That's gospel. And I go, oh, really? Because he's kind of like flip-flopped a number of times, but all right, you do you. So this is what Breitbart has pulled for us. This is a poll that was conducted over by the Trafalgar Group. We're going to take a look at that. Breitbart's political editor, though, Matt Boyle, was also interviewed on America First with Sebastian Gorka. He said that he would not be surprised if Democrats would sacrifice Fauci to save their credibility on the issue of the origins of the virus. And so it sounds like that's just speculation. Fauci, who has dropped in confidence by 42.2% since last year, has been the center of a series of news cycles by flip-flopping in congressional hearings, along with media outlets releasing Fauci emails via the Freedom of Information Act. So let's take a look at this poll here. This is from the Trafalgar, I can never say that one. I've been following them for like 4 years now, but I can never say the name. Has your confidence in Dr. Fauci gone up or gone down in the past year? So 26% of respondents say unchanged. 30.1% say it has decreased significantly. Okay, so almost a third of the people have said it's almost decreased significantly in the year. Then we add another 12% to that, so 42% also say decreased. Increased significantly, we've got about totaling 22% say it's gotten better, 42% say it's gotten worse, no opinion, 10%. So significant numbers saying that it's actually going down, and it's going down quickly. So we see that Rand Paul yesterday showed a tweet from him, said, I told you so. He's been front and center, holding Fauci's feet to the fire, making sure that the proper questions are being asked, and it's having an impact because people are sick of it. We've all sort of felt this in our gut, that what they're telling us is not the full truth or the whole truth, so help them God. And we're tired of it. And the polls are starting to reflect that. So, of course, Donald Trump came out today and he posted, he released a statement here through Molly Hemingway. Former President Trump asked, what did Dr. Fauci know about the gain of function research and when did he know it? So let's take a quick look and see what he is talking about here. He says, after seeing the emails, our country is fortunate I didn't do what Dr. Fauci wanted me to do. For instance, I closed our borders to China very early, despite him not wanting them closed. The Democrats and the fake news media even called me a xenophobe, which I recall. In the end, we saw this was a life-saving decision, and likewise with closing our borders to Europe, specifically to certain heavily infected countries. I was later given credit, even by, quote, Tony here, for saving hundreds of thousands of lives. Dr. Fauci didn't put an emphasis on speed of vaccine production because he thought it would take 3, 4, maybe even 5 years to create, which he's right. I got it done in less than 9 months with Operation Warp Speed. He's right. In retrospect, the vaccine is saving the world. Then I placed the greatest bet in history. We ordered billions of dollars worth of vaccines before we knew it even worked. Had that not been done, our wonderful vaccines would not have been administered until October of this year. No one would have had the shot that has now saved the world and millions of lives. Also, Dr. Fauci was totally against masks, even when I thought that they would be at least helpful. He then changed his mind and completely became a radical masker, which I like that. There are a lot of questions, Trump says, that must be answered by Fauci. The funding of Wuhan by the U.S. was foolishly started during the Obama administration in 2014, but ended under the Trump administration. When I heard about it, I said, no way. What did Dr. Fauci know about gain-of-function research, and when did he know it? And I've got much the same questions myself, but we don't know.